Hello, everyone. Welcome. Thank you for joining us today. We're just going to give folks a few more minutes before we start.
Hey, there's a volume on there too, Lindsay, I think. Mm-hmm.
Alrighty. Well, again, thank you everyone for joining us today here. I think we can get going now. We've got a few more folks trickling in, but this presentation will be recorded, so it will be available for reference on our website at the conclusion of today. So thank you all very much for joining us today for this informational webinar for the CleanBC Plastic Actions Fund. My name is Devin Delarge. I'm with Alacrity Canada, and joining me today is Georgia Lavender from the Synergy Foundation, as well as Aaron Prescott from CleanBC. So we'll get going. I'll pass it over to Aaron Prescott very briefly just to introduce CleanBC and to provide a territorial acknowledgement.
Thanks, Devin. As Devin mentioned, I'm Aaron Prescott. I'm with a senior policy analyst with the BC Ministry of Environment and Climate Change Strategy in our environmental standards branch, and I'm the project lead for the CleanBC Plastics Action Fund, working in the area of plastic and waste prevention generally. I am grateful to be on the call today from the traditional territories of the Lekwungen speaking people of the Songhees and Esquimalt, and with Saanich First Nations. And as we just passed the full moon earlier this week, I was reminded of recently being introduced to the 13 moons of the Saanich year. And so this recent moon, I found out, was the moon of putting your paddle away in the bush. And so a time of unpredictable weather, and also recognized as a time to prepare and repair clothing and tools. And so I thought that was interesting, and I appreciate being able to reflect on the moons of the Saanich year and the importance of the land and the sea that I am very grateful to live and work and play on. And I also recognize that we have people joining us from across the traditional lands of Indigenous people across the province. I'm excited to be here today and to have a launch into the third phase of the CleanBC Plastics Action Fund. I'm always really interested to hear about the projects and the ideas that are here in British Columbia to reduce plastic waste in our province. The CleanBC Plastics Action Fund was originally started in 2020 during the pandemic, and has grown from the original scope of manufacturing and processing recycled plastic to include circular economy, innovation, reuse and repair, and as ways to reduce plastic waste. As well, the fund was expanded to provide opportunities for Indigenous communities and businesses. And now in the third phase, more opportunities for regional plastics innovation and support diversity of projects across the province. So it's really exciting to see British Columbians see the work being done, the innovation to lead solutions to reduce plastic waste. And so, yeah, with that, I will pass it back to Devin.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Aaron. So In today's informational webinar, we'll just go over a few pieces of information, and then we'll cover kind of the body of the fund, all the objectives, the overview, and then we'll get into the eligibility, how the actual assessment process works, and what selection criteria applications will be weighed against. Then towards the end of the session here, we'll have a chance for anybody to ask questions. And if you do have some questions that pop up during this session, please use the Zoom's chat box feature there. We'll record all those questions and we'll address them towards the end of the session. Perfect. So thank you very much, Aaron, for providing that overview of the Plastic Actions Fund. As you mentioned, it was first initiated in 2020, and so far we have invested over 13 million in plastic actions projects across British Columbia. So the fund is administered by Alacrity Canada, which is a not-for-profit based here in Victoria, as well as offices in Vancouver. We're joined in our administration by the Synergy Foundation to provide circular economy expertise for the fund. Lovely. And I think with that, I will pass it over to my colleague, Georgia at Synergy, to go over some of the more nuanced aspects of the fund.
Awesome. Thank you, Devin, and welcome everybody. So as Devin mentioned, I'll just walk through the fund itself and the application process, and we'll have lots of time at the end for questions. So for a bit more context, there is over $20 million of funding available, split between those 4 funding categories that Aaron mentioned at the beginning, and we'll get into the details of each of those 4 funding categories momentarily. There is no minimum funding request that applications must make. However, there are funding ranges that kind of vary by project category, and those are also all indicated in the program guides. In terms of key dates, the applications will remain open until December 2nd, 2024. So just over a year for those applications, or until all of the funds are subscribed, which is why we do encourage early application to the fund. So the 4 funding categories, as this is kind of the 3rd year of, or the 3rd phase of this program, there are some new categories which were mentioned, but the first one being the post-consumer recycled plastics category. The second is the circular economy innovation category, which is going to look at more of those reuse and repair projects. The Indigenous projects category, and the regional plastics innovation category. And so when you're thinking of your project, you would be applying under one of these 4 funding categories. So we'll walk through these objectives and then think about which funding category is most applicable to your project. So the first funding category, that post-consumer recycled plastics category, the expected or anticipated project range is between 250,000 and 1.2 million. However, project requests can be kind of below or above that, but this is that anticipated range. So projects that are applying need to hit the desired scopes and outcomes of the funding category they're applying under. So with this funding category, projects will increase BC's capacity to produce more PCR plastic and plastic products and packing manufacturers. It will increase the use of PCR plastic in manufacturing and support PCR plastic product reuse, research, design, and testing that will increase the use of PCR in the province. So projects under this funding category cannot include plastic collection, transportation, or depots, really looking at that processing capacity of the PCR plastics. And under this funding category, it can fund up to 66% of the total project's eligible expenses. The second category is the circular economy innovation category, with expected project ranges between 150 and 750,000. 3 objectives of this funding category are to develop the growth and commercialization of reuse businesses that will help to support the phase out of single-use plastic items. Again, developing the growth and commercialization of repair businesses to extend the life of products and materials. And the third being to develop tools or products that connect consumers with circular economy businesses. So this could include reuse and repair businesses or other projects that result in the reduction of plastic waste. Projects under this funding category can include pilots and trials to demonstrate and test the viability of new innovations. This funding category will also fund up to 66% of project expenses. The third funding category is the Indigenous projects category. Expected project ranges of 75 to 150,000. This funding category was designed to support projects that were led by Indigenous or individuals, communities, businesses, and organizations that self-identify as First Nation, Métis, or Inuit. So these projects will support plastic waste activities, reduction activities that will either prevent or eliminate waste through reuse and repair models. So taking inspiration from that CEI stream, remanufacturing, value add processing and recycling processes, taking inspiration from that PCR stream, or projects under this funding category can also include capacity building and education around circular economy and plastic waste reduction, which are led by Indigenous people, communities, and businesses. There is a Indigenous program guide that has more specific details on this specific funding category available on the Lacrity website as well. And this funding category will fund up to 80% of the eligible project expenses. The fourth and final funding category is the Regional Plastics Innovation category, and the anticipated project sizes would be 100 to 250,000. This funding category is really to provide developmental support and project financing for startup and early stage businesses. The key is that these projects must be located outside of the Metro Vancouver region and Capital Regional District, or within communities with a population of less than 25,000. So if you're located in a community that is within the Metro Vancouver region or the CRD and have a population under 25,000, you can request an exemption during the EOI phase. Projects funded through this stream will address the same outcomes as the other funding streams, but this allows us to ensure a geographical diversity of the fund distribution as well. Eligible organizations need to meet these following criteria set out below as well. So really looking at those early stage businesses, employing no more than 10 full-time employees, have generated no more than 100,000 in gross revenue in the previous fiscal year, and as I mentioned, located in communities with a population under 25,000. So this category will also fund 80% of the project expenses. And those are the four funding categories under the Plastics Action Fund. For all funding categories, there are the same eligibility requirements. So all proposed projects must be registered, operate, and pay taxes within the province of BC. They must be majority owned by a BC resident or have sole or primary operations within the province. All projects must demonstrate that they can be completed by February 28th of 2026. And all projects are required to provide a financial contribution of eligible program costs. So as I mentioned, for the PCR and CEI stream, those projects need to demonstrate that they can contribute a minimum of 33% to the project. For the Indigenous category and the RPI category, they must demonstrate they can contribute a minimum of 20%. Lastly, applicants must be a private company, a nonprofit organization or social enterprise, community contribution company, cooperative organization, or an Indigenous group or organization to be eligible. So in summary, you must be registered and headquartered in BC and have a fixed place of business in BC. The program will not include BC-based subsidiaries of organizations that maintain a corporate headquarters outside of the province. So a bit more into the application process. So it is a two-stage application process. First stage is submitting that expression of interest. The EOI form is an online form available on the Alacrity webpage. And Devin, maybe you could just pop the link into the chat there if you haven't already. So this EOI, all applicants will complete it online, and then it will be reviewed by the review committee to select qualified applicants. So this EOI really ensures the eligibility of the organization in the project and that it meets the outcomes of the desired funding category in which it's applying for, and gives an overview of what the proposed project is and a high level of the outcomes. So the panel may provide feedback to applicants that require revisions under the EOI stage or ask for clarifying questions. Applicants that are successful in the EOI stage will be invited to submit a detailed grant proposal. For the applicants that are invited to submit a detailed grant proposal, they will receive that from Alacrity and they will receive an application form. So there will be a template in which they will fill out to ensure we have all of the necessary information to assess that project. Detailed applications must be submitted within 20 business days of receiving the invitation to submit. And there's often questions around the supporting document that might be required with a detailed application. So the additional materials you could anticipate having to gather for that detailed proposal would include your detailed project description, your budget and financial information, any of your partnerships and collaborations, whether that's a letter of support or letters of intent, monitoring and evaluation, how you intend to monitor your project and evaluate the success and KPIs, your sustainability and risk mitigation plans, and any additional supporting documentation. For the review and the selection process, there will be that initial review to ensure that you meet the eligibility criteria and adhere to the guidelines. And there will be evaluation and scoring. So this is where the review panel will assess applications on predetermined evaluation criteria. All of these evaluation criteria and their weighted scores can be found in the program guide as well, and we'll walk through those in a moment. From there, scores will be summed and averaged to produce an overall score for each applicant. From there, there'll be the shortlist and final selection. So from the review panel, a short list of top-ranked applications will be determined based on those final scores. Alacrity may conduct interviews or request additional information from those shortlisted applicants. From there, the shortlist will be submitted to the Government of BC, and successful applicants will be notified of their grant award. Unsuccessful applicants will also receive feedback at that time. A little bit more on the valuation criteria. You will notice that the weighting is for some criteria the same across all funding categories. However, as we start to get into some of those latter elements, the weighting changes. So be mindful of that if you are preparing a detailed grant application, where those weightings lie. So all projects will be weighted the same when it comes to alignment, feasibility, and organizational capacity, with alignment really considering how many of that funding categories, preferred outcomes is your project addressing and to what depth. Feasibility, we want to know, does the applicant have a reasonable plan to complete their project within the time frame specified, and a detailed budget with that confirmed matching funding. Under organizational capacity, we want to ensure that the applicant has the organizational expertise to execute the project and that you have a reasonable risk mitigation strategy in place. And then the next criteria there, target waste, it applies to the PCR, CEI, and RPI streams at different weighting. But with target waste, we want to know to the degree to which the project addresses problematic waste not currently covered through existing EPR programs. Under innovation, we want to know the degree to which the project will establish new processes, products, or circular solutions. With scale, we would want to know how scalable and replicable is the project. And then with capacity building, this criteria only applies to the Indigenous stream, as that's the only stream that can receive funding for capacity building. We want to know to which degree would the project support education and training and or support in plastic waste reduction. And then an overall note that organizations that were not awarded funding in the previous phases will be prioritized in the assessment process. So successful applicants will have reporting requirements to adhere to. So fund recipients will be required to provide progress reports every fiscal quarter after the initial transfer payment until the conclusion of their project. So applicants must keep invoices and receipts related to project expenses, proof of payment, etc. in case of an audit. Upon project completion, applicants must submit a follow-up report to demonstrate how they have how the outcomes have developed as a direct result of receiving funding and report on the KPIs indicated in their application. A percentage of applicant reports will be audited as mentioned and expenses reviewed in detail by an independent auditor. I'll talk through some of the eligible and eligible expenses next. Again, these are all detailed out clearly in the application guide for further reference. But really, eligible expenses are going to be those expenses that are directly linked to the proposed project. So mainly those capital expenditures and salary costs for project-specific labor. So under capital expenses, you know, the machinery, processing, and other testing types of equipment. Labor must be clearly outlined and specifically related to the design, implementation, and monitoring of the project. Retrofit costs to enable the project. So this could include contractor fees, materials, permits, and other related expenses. Contractor or partner organization fees such as testing, design, and other R&D related costs. As well as equipment and installation, freight and transportation charges, and PPE, all related to the implementation of the project. Eligible expense exceptions. One would be marketing and media related expenses. That is only an eligible expense for the circular economy innovation and the Indigenous funding categories. It is not an eligible expense for the PCR or the RPI funding category. And then education, outreach, and capacity building activities is only an eligible expense for the Indigenous category. It is not an eligible expense for the other three funding categories. There is also the list of ineligible expenses. So these are any expenses that are incurred before the project start date, the general operating expenses, attendance fees for trade shows, conferences, and other industry events, salary for general staff not related to the implementation of the project, your general website or IT upgrades, hosting an existing website or processing credit card fees, packaging material for product shipping and related shipping costs, real estate capital purchases, purchase or lease of private or personal vehicles, labor costs associated with those ongoing operations, travel and hospitality for staff or contractors, structural renovations not specific to the project, and feasibility studies would all be ineligible expenses through the funding categories. So if your organization is interested in applying, you will find that detailed information and EOI form on Alacrity's webpage. So I've got the link on the slide here as well. As a reminder, those applications will remain open for until December 2nd, 2024, or until all of those funds are subscribed. So again, just encourage those early applications. And a refresher on those important dates. So as mentioned, EOIs are open. Detailed applications for those who are invited to submit one will be required to submit those within 20 days of that invitation. Fund disbursement will happen upon project approval on a rolling basis. Reporting, grant recipients must report every fiscal quarter after your initial payment until that project conclusion, and projects must be completed by February 28th, 2026. So I'll leave that there and we can hop into questions that have started to come up into the chat box, and Devin will be helping me with answering those questions.
Fantastic. Yeah,
and I'll
thank you.
just leave this here for just a second in case you wanted to grab that email address. If a question pops up after today's session as well that you want to have addressed.
Lovely. Thank you so much, Georgia. One of the first questions that we did receive was that if this recording would be available after this presentation, and the slide deck will not be available. However, this recording will be. It'll be available both on YouTube as well as the Alacrity Canada webpage. Lovely. Well, thank you again to everyone who put questions into the chat box during that presentation. So we'll just take this moment and we'll run through some of them there. So another question which we received is, according to the eligibility slide, is Economic Development Department or an Aboriginal Development Corporation eligible? Yes, they would be eligible to apply so long as they are registered and based within British Columbia. Next question which popped up would be, can an EOI be edited after it is submitted? No, unfortunately, it cannot be edited after it is submitted. However, if you would like to make some updates or changes to that application, we simply ask that you reach out to Alacrity just to let us know that you are withdrawing that previous application, at which point you then can submit a new updated application. However, alternately, if you do submit multiple applications, we will only review your most recent submission. Perfect. So another question popped in is, what is the timeline for shortlisting? So as Georgia mentioned, all applications are reviewed on a rolling basis, so they are reviewed as they are submitted. For the detailed grant proposals and those stage 2 applications, we will typically request those within 8 weeks of the submission of your EOI application. However, it is noteworthy that this is a competitive process. So if the EOI was not found to be strong enough initially, it may be revisited at a later date for that detailed grant proposal. Perfect. So another question is, can the 33% coming from applicants be a combination of cash and in-kind? So the answer is yes. So that in-kind application or applicant's financial contribution can be made up of both cash from the applicant as well as in-kind contributions. However, the in-kind contribution of the applicant's financial contribution can only be up to 50%. Lovely. So another great question is, can the funding be split, configured, or to maximize the shred benefit? Or do proponents require that 33-66 split on all expense line items? So the answer is yes. Applications or the funding allocations can be split to maximize shred. So that 66-33 must be adhered to for the entire project budget. Perfect.
Another one here we have, Devin, is would projects be eligible to apply under both the PCR and RPI categories to maximize fund opportunity?
So the answer to that would be no. Unfortunately, applications can only apply to one category. Lovely. So another question, is the link to the application the same as the EOI? Yes. Yes, so that link there, that'll link straight through to the EOI, and the detailed stage 2 application, as Georgia mentioned, will be submitted or sent out via email. It'll be an application package, which will contain a few different documents there, and that will come from Alacrity Canada.
Mm-hmm. Next one, if we finish the project before money runs out in the Plastics Action Fund, can we reapply with another project? If this question is directed in the way that I am reading it, it would look like you're applying for 2 projects under the Plastics Action Fund. We'd only be able to fund 1 project under the Plastics Action Fund for this phase. So similarly to that PCR RPI question on maximizing the fund availability, it would just be under 1.
Great. And the next question that we have come through here was, if you were previously funded through a separate phase, can you now apply to a different program category? And the answer is yes. So if you were funded for a specific category in phase 1 or phase 2, you would then be able to apply to any category that you'd feel is the best fit for your project for phase 3. Perfect. And the next question is, are funding contributions based on the total project costs or just the eligible project costs? So that would be eligible project costs. So there is a section in the application there where it will detail any ineligible costs for the project, which would not be covered by that funding. Lovely. And another question that has popped in is, do applications get notifications even if they do not get an invitation to apply for the full grant? Yes, all applications will be notified if they're successful or not. And as previously mentioned, if the application is close but not quite there, we will reach out and provide some instruction as to how to perhaps refine that application. And likewise, if the application has any areas which we're unclear about, we will reach out there for that additional information.
Similarly to that question, one popped up that says, we applied on the first day. How long does it take before we will know anything? So those detailed grant proposals would be requested within 8 weeks of submission. So we're still within that window. And as Devin mentioned, others may be who were not initially contacted, may be revisited as well. Devin, we have another one here that says, are any salary expenses for research and development eligible for reimbursement?
Yes, so salary for R&D projects would be eligible so long as that R&D project is eligible under the other categories. Perfect. And the next question that looks like it has popped up would be, would the corporation applying need to be in business over 1 year to be eligible? So the corporation does not need to be in business over 1 year to be eligible. However, there are some other eligibility criteria which might affect that. But as mentioned under the Regional Plastics Innovation Stream, businesses which are really early stage and small revenue scale would be eligible to apply.
Mm-hmm. Next question here, Devin, is regarding BC impact. We see that the origin of plastic should be BC in terms of the input material, but doesn't matter where the ultimate product is being sold. Finished product, sorry.
That's all right, great question. So yes, the input material does have to be from British Columbia, so we can't be pulling plastics out of other provinces or countries. However, if that plastic is then turned into a product, that product can be sold anywhere in the world.
Yeah. And next one here is, are there any consequences for over-contribution of in-kind expenses?
Absolutely not. In fact, we encourage, an over-contribution of in-kind expenses, if that's even possible.
Next one here is, can economic development departments of an Indigenous community apply for categories other than the Indigenous funding category?
Absolutely, they can. Yeah, we welcome all applicants to apply to the category which they feel would be the best fit for their project.
Next one is, can you give an example of pilots and trials to demonstrate and test the viability of new innovations under the CEI stream, or to clarify this?
Yeah, so it's a pilot and trial innovation. So we don't have a explicit example, as these innovations are new and not present to us. However, what that refers to is the application of a new technology or a new piece of doing things. So is there a new process that you would like to implement, or a new piece of technology that you would implement? So pilots and trials do not cover feasibility studies. So only concrete actions are eligible as pilots and trials.
Awesome. And maybe I can just build off of that one, is it can also be looking to a pilot or trial to test that innovation in a new community or a new region as well, to ensure the viability of that.
Lovely. So the
Next one
next
here.
question.
Oh, sorry.
I'll jump on that. So if you are collaborating with another organization and they submitted a grant in one category, can you apply to another category? So that is only eligible if your projects are distinct from each other. So if the projects are mutually exclusive, the answer is yes. However, if the projects or the collaboration, is focused on the same outcome, then no, it can only be through one funding category.
Next one here is project start is within 3 months of funding. What does that entail? So once you have received the confirmation of your receipt of funding and the funds have been dispersed, your project has to start within 3 months of that date.
Perfect. So next question is, how involved is the full application for the detailed grant proposal? Is there a template available? So no, there is no template available ahead of time. However, when you do receive that, you'll have 20 business days or a month in order to complete that. The EOI is a very good guideline as for what the detailed application looks like. The detailed application will expand on many of those areas.
Last question that I think we have so far, Devin, is if an application is not accepted, will feedback be given to revise the original application?
Absolutely. As mentioned, if there's any questions or concerns that we might have, we'll reach out for more information. And likewise, if the project is really close to being a great fit, but just needs a few tweaks here and there, we'll also reach out. And if an application is rejected, that does not mean that you're ineligible to apply again. We, in fact, encourage you to come back and apply again, perhaps with a revised project.
Looks like all of the questions that have come through in the chat so far. So lots of great questions there. Does anybody have any final questions that they wanted to put in the chat today? Keeping in mind, I'll pop this link in here again. But if you think of questions after the event today, you can always reach out with those as well. The link to the website here includes all of the program guides, the EOI application. It will shortly have the recording of this webinar, and it does include some examples of previously funded projects and an opportunity to reach out with more questions.
Perfect. And I saw just one question pop in there. The email address will be plasticactionsfund@alacritycanada.com. And we'll drop that into the chat momentarily. You can also find that on our website. There will be a direct link. If you click it, you'll be able to reach out to us.
Looks like we've had just one more question pop into here. Our current business plan, from what we have read, meets all the goals. So how would we distinguish what category it fits under? Review the outcomes under the 4 different funding categories and see which which outcomes your project most closely aligns with, whether it is that PCR manufacturing, the CEI stream, the RPI, or in the Indigenous stream. So review those funding category specific outcomes and apply under the one which most strongly aligns with your project. Thanks, Devin, for popping that link into the chat there as well for the email address. So as we said, plasticsactionfund@alacritycanada.com. Wonderful. All right. Well, thank you very much, everybody.
Thank you, everyone, again for joining us today. And if you have any further questions, please don't hesitate to reach out. Oh, I saw one last question there we can address before we shut it down. It looks like, is each stream guaranteed a percentage of successful applications, and how will the funding be distributed between these? So yes, each stream has a funding allocation to it, and all funds for that stream will be distributed to applications that fall under that category.
Great. Thank you very much, everybody. And the recording will be up shortly.